We'll start back at the Flexy 205 main summary page, and the eagle-eyed amongst you might notice a small change on this page. I've loaded in a previous backed up version of an application in my Flexy so that we've got a few more interesting things to look at. But let me just remind you of the parts of this page. So the top left-hand corner shows us the internet connection and explains that we're running on our Wi-Fi, which is our primary internet connection. On the right, it shows how long we've been connected to Talk2M on this session. And remember, this is the outgoing from the Flexy to Talk2M. So it doesn't mean that we're connected from eCatcher. This is just simply that this Flexy is connected to Talk2M on a permanent connection. The bottom left tells us the type of Ewon, the IP mask and the IP address and mask for the LAN ports, and also tells me which extension cards I've got in my Flexy. And then this box on the right here, the KPI, this is showing our key performance indicators. And these are values that within our Flexy configuration are the most important to us. And they will appear a couple of places in the system as we look at it. But you can see the values there are changing, the data's updating, and we've got a quick way of having an overview of the most important information in our system. Okay, so the menus on the left-hand side is where we have everything set up. And I will start at the bottom. So the bottom section of menus are the setup menus, and these cover a lot of the same information that we've set up already through the wizards, and indeed you can run the wizards again from this menu here. So if we need to relaunch them, we've got the option there, as well, of course, as with the link in the top right-hand corner of the screen. The next item down on this is our basic IDE. Basic is one of the programming options that we can add into a Flexy, so we can run advanced functionality, advanced capabilities in the Flexy based on a very easy to learn and apply scripting language. So the development environment that we offer in the Flexy here has the ability to load a pre-written script, or you can write it within the editing window there. You can debug it, you can set it running, and it will operate on your system as a test. And then if it's loaded and stored in memory, of course, when the Flexy reboots, it will automatically start running. The next menu item down is our users menu. Now, we've logged into our Flexy as administrator, but of course there may be situations where you want other users to be able to log in remotely, but not to have the full rights of an administrator. So that's what we're showing here. We've created a second user in our system, and if we configure this, we can see that the rights that this user has are reduced against those of an administrator. So they're allowed to view all of the tags, all of the values that we've configured within the system. They're allowed to look at the I/O values, they're allowed to acknowledge alarms, but they're not going to be allowed to change anything in the configuration or have access via FTP or update the firmware. So a few options there to reduce the capability of certain users actually on the Flexy itself. The next menu down is the system menu, and this is divided into three separate parts. We'll start with storage, because this is the shortest one to explain. So within the storage area, we have the ability to set up our memory settings. This is how the memory internal to the Flexy is being partitioned. And the key point to mention here is if you make any changes here, you will lose configuration. So if you want to readjust the memory shared between the different parts, do it first before you do anything else in the system. But the default is that we've got a certain amount of memory allocated for the user's uploaded files. We have a certain amount for the recording, and then for the events and the alarm history. So those two are always fixed for us to be able to look back at. We can also erase all or part of the file system and the memory as we've stored it within this section here. And we also come across an extra section here about editing our configuration. So if you're an old school Ewon user, then you may have already had some introduction to the system and the communication configuration pages. This is another way of configuring and setting up, and all of the possible parameters for setting up and configuring your Flexy are available here as editable values. And if you want to look at this and look at some of the extended features, then on our support pages, there are 2 documents you can download, one for the system parameters and the other for the communications parameters. And these documents take you through all the possible parameters in those 2 files and how you can change them and what the values are that are valid for them, etc. So that's another way of configuring your Flexy for more advanced operations. The communications tab, one above that, is for setting up the configuration to your local devices and across the internet. So within the general settings, we have the ability to change our IP address again for the LAN port. Within the networking, the internet connection is very similar. This is what we had in the wizards, and we've got another way of accessing the same information here. Same with setting up the second Ethernet port, the Wi-Fi port. This is as it was set up in the wizard. Similarly, we have the VPN connection available there as well. The routing tables, if you can't use the default plug and route for remote access, where the Flexy itself takes the place of the originating device rather than acting as a traditional gateway, it may be that you need to turn that off. This is where you can do that. A proxy server, if you need to configure that, it's here. And the security settings as well for extended WAN protection if you want to include extra security there. The IP services here, this is where we're setting the default port addresses for things like HTTP and the FTP. And if your particular device needs to use different ports for those, you can set them up using the settings here. And the configuration here also allows us to force an extra level of security on eBuddy so that we have to log in twice when you go in through eBuddy, apologies. And otherwise, you've got a big reset button at the bottom there. And the main settings are those which are very similar to the first wizard that we went through. So the identification, the language, what that's going to be used for. The language we're using on these menus. Then we have some settings for alarms, and if we've got an alarm action, so if an alarm event occurs in the Flexy, that's going to trigger an action, and these settings here tell us what the retry needs to be if the action fails. Date and time we saw already in the original configuration setting up. And then we have the planner. The planner is a way of creating time-triggered actions within the Flexy. And the actions that you can set up are along the lines of sending emails, sending an SMS message, putting files to an FTP server, or sending an SNMP trap operation. So the configuration for the planner entry, when we come onto it, you'll see they're exactly the same settings that we can do for alarms. But here you can do it instead of an alarm based on an event. This is basing on a timing interval. So you can set up the operation and say every day at midnight, send a report based on the logged values within my Flexy. So the task planner is a very simple way for creating those time-triggered operations. The next section down is looking at the net services, and some of these will need to be set up before you can use the features in the Flexy. So the first one that typically has to be set up is the SMTP server for emails. Now you can use your own email server if you want to, but free of charge we offer you the ability to use our Talk2M email relay server. And these are the details you need to enter for that. So relay.talk2m.com. The standard server port is 25, really shouldn't change that. And then you need to include a username which is going to be used for the sending emails from field. Important to set something that's going to be legal, as in terms it's going to be recognised as a legal email address by your email receiving server, because you don't want your emails for alarms, etc. being spammed. So pick a name in here which looks like a genuine email address. If your SMTP server needs a username and password to log in, you've got the option there, but for the relay Talk2M, you don't need to include that. The NTP server means that as well as receiving an online date and timestamp from an NTP server, the Flexy itself could forward that on to devices connected on its LAN port. FTP allows the Flexy to send files to an FTP server. So this is entering the IP address for an FTP server that the Flexy can find on its network connections. OPC UA is another way of sharing data. If you've not come across it before, it's very commonly used with SCADA systems. And again, the Flexy has the ability to both act as an OPC server and an OPC client. So in this situation, we're saying that there is an OPC server elsewhere on the network, and the Flexy will be able to access data from that. SNMP, again, another way of passing alarm messages out over an Ethernet connection. If there's an SNMP server in the system, then you can configure it here. It's commonly used in environments such as building management services, monitoring, UPS systems. So you may have come across it there. And then the data management section. The data management allows us to pass data out from the Flexy to the Talk2M cloud and store it there temporarily or push through live data. So two options here. We can store our historical data temporarily up in the cloud, and this is done on a scheduled update. So once an hour in this setting, all the data will be passed up to the data mailbox in the Talk2M cloud, and then it can be pulled from that data mailbox to applications elsewhere on the internet. So this is a good way of combining data from multiple Flexys by all of them pushing to your data mailbox on your Talk2M account. That data can then be gathered from that one place. The other option down here is wanting to push live data and those KPIs. So your key performance indicators, as well as being displayed on the summary page within the Flexy, they can also be pushed up to the Talk2M cloud, and they can be displayed on the M2Web portal as well. So we will discuss M2Web in the webinar tomorrow, but it's the web browser view of the data and the units in your Talk2M cloud. For both of these, it's possible to group the different data values within the Flexy into 4 separate groups, which means you can filter which tags, which data values you want to publish at any time. Okay, the accessories option gives us the ability to configure a bolt or a wireless bridge. Now the wireless bolt, the wireless bridge are Anybus products which allow you to connect wireless devices to the LAN port of the Flexy. The Wi-Fi module or the Wi-Fi in the extender option in the Flexy only allows you to connect to a router for your internet connection. What the wireless bolt allows you to do is to connect devices on the LAN side. So it's a nice extension, extra option that you've got there. And then we have some diagnostics at the bottom here. So looking at events logging, looking at any PPP dump. If you're using a cellular, it uses PPP. And some debug options as well that you can turn on. If you turn on the debug options, you'll get more data events and it will slow down system performance. So really only for when you're trying to set up a system for the first time. Okay, so that's our setup menu. The next thing that we'll look at, and this really is a brief overview, I'm not going to go into the details of everything here. I just want to give you an overview of how the system can be worked. We obviously run a full workshop on configuring and setting up the Flexy. So this is just an overview. As I've said, the program I've loaded in here is to give you something extra to look at. So this is no longer our empty Flexy from purchase. We've got some tags, we've got some values stored in here, we've set up some alarms. So once a system's been configured with various values, then we have a view like this. And you can see what we're seeing here is a live view of data. You can see data values changing, and actually I've got the ability to flick switches and affect values in the system in that way. Digital input at the top there, just turned off. So this is looking at live data from my values. We created, and you can edit these by changing the mode in the top left-hand corner from view to setup, and then we can select any of these, edit it, and show you the different parts. So each tag has a name, and then we have to say, where does the data value come from? Now this is a Modbus value, so it's coming from our I/O server, which is the Modbus server. In this case, it's Boolean. And then for each of these tags, we have the options as to whether we want to create an alarm based on its value, whether we want to log its value historically, so storing data for a long period of time, or if we want to see a snapshot of the last section of data that's been stored. We've also got the ability to publish tags from the Flexy, and we can push these out to a Modbus client or to an SNMP device. And we can specify in this configuration here if we want to have it as a key performance indicator and whether we want to include it in a group. If we don't include a tag in a group, then all tags will be published for key performance indicators, etc. So if we look at one of these down here, this one's got a few more things set against it. You'll see on the left-hand side here, these ticks are indicating we have an alarm configured, we have historical logging turned on, we have real-time logging, and we have a KPI. So for this unit, this particular value here, we're saying if this is an internal memory, this is actually one that's been created in my basic program, and we're now looking at the alarm. So we're going to trigger an alarm if it gets over 43. We're going to log data, and we're going to log data if it changes by more than a half. Otherwise, we have the option to say on a time basis, log the data. So once a second is the minimum that we can do for our historical logging. The real-time logging again has a log interval and then a time span. So when we look at the real-time logging, it will show us the last minute's worth of data. And we've enabled the KPI at the bottom there. So we've configured an alarm. We have the ability here to configure our alarm action. And here we could set up that we want the alarm to be sent as an email to somebody. So enter the email address in there. Enter the subject. You can attach files to the emails, different ways of setting up actions based on the triggering of an alarm. So that's that there. If we go back to our view option, then at the top here for this one, we now can see the options to see the real-time graph. We can see the historical logging. We can see the historical graph. So the real-time graph pops up and we can see the step values changing half every time for the last minute's worth of data from that device. And similarly with the historical logging, we have the ability to say, okay, I want to see maybe the last hour's worth of data and refresh that. And okay, last hour included quite a lot of data. Let's go up a little bit. And okay. I love the historical logging. I always get this wrong. No, my time zones are not large enough. Let me go back an hour. There we go. So we can see our values going up and down on the historical logging chart as well. Takes a bit of time to get a detail in there. Historical logging table, again, you specify the time that you want to view the data for. And we see all the values in here. So that's the values view of the setup within the system. I mentioned that we had some alarms set, and we can view a summary of any alarms that have been triggered and see those here. So these are the current state of my 3 alarms in the system, and the history shows the previously triggered alarms when they return to their normal state, when the alarm condition ended is visible there. I mentioned that the data we were looking at was coming from a Modbus server. Here is the list of the internal servers in my Flexy. So the Modbus server here enables me to say the IP address of the device, the Modbus device that I'm going to be reading with Modbus TCP. So these topics are set up for each of the servers applicable to your configuration. So you enable it and you specify what the poll rate is going to be. All data values within a Flexy are polled based on a time stamp, and the different poll rates are possible. You can have up to 3 different poll rates. If you only have 3 different devices, or maybe one device you want to access at 3 different rates, then you can put the IP address in here. If you have more than 3 devices you need to access, then leave the IP address here blank, and when you actually set up the tag back in your tag values, you can enter the IP address for the different locations then. So the I/O servers list that I'm offered here depends on the extension cards that I've got in my system. So I've only got Ethernet, so I'm not being offered any extensions for a serial protocol. So I haven't got, for example, MPI in there. I've only got the extension cards that will support an Ethernet-based setting. And then at the top, we have our global settings, and these are specifying the default ports for those Ethernet-based protocols. So the Modbus TCP, Ethernet IP ports, and the timeout parameter as well for all of those I/O servers. So we've been logging some data, we've been triggering some alarms, so we can now look at our log files here. So 3 log files that we want to look at. The first is our event logs. The event logs are the place to go when something goes wrong. And if you remember when we were doing our configuration earlier and my Wi-Fi didn't connect, we actually looked at the event log to see that event and find out what's happening. So we've got a few problems in here, and they're all time-stamped, and we've got the information that we've got problems, but they're all fairly historical. The most recent event is always at the top. So we haven't had a problem for a while, and hopefully everything's running correctly now. Our real-time logs are available and explaining what's happened, and these are going to be just the actions on the system. Again, there may be problems. My OPC UA server isn't connected, so I'm getting a failure for that. So we're seeing error messages in here as well. So if something isn't working properly, have a look at the real-time logs, and you can see there what the problem might be. And you have the ability to filter these based on which sources they're from. So we can say, okay, I just want to see the VPN errors, or I just want to see the OPC UA errors, and we can filter them in that way. The scheduled actions, these are actions that you've either set up maybe in the time server. They could be actions created from a basic program, or they could be my emails being sent out from my alarms. So here we've got our send mail. These have been triggered by the alarms, and the email messages have been sent out to indicate the alarm status at that time. So the information is held there in the files. And then the last place I just want to quickly show you, well, this is the files transfer section. So all the data that's been set up in the Flexy, so all the data that's being logged, all the configuration that you've created, it's all stored as files within the system. And it's possible for you to upload and download those files individually. Downloading them from the Flexy is very easy because you have a list of all the files here. So program.baz here, for example, that's our basic program. If I wanted to store a backup copy of just that program, then right-click, save file. It's a web browser. You just save it to your hard disk in the same way as you would normally. If you're logging data, then each of the values that you're logging has its own separate log file, and that will give you a comma-separated value file that you can upload into an Excel spreadsheet or something like that. So each of those separately is a log file, and we have the information for the data there. There are other configuration files and events files, statistics files, all of these you can download. And one of the last things which is very useful is the variables list. So if you're configuring one Flexy and you want to port the same configuration to another Flexy, it's very easy to download the variable list, var list, and just upload it to your new Flexy. And as long as the two Flexys both have the same extension cards and the same I/O servers available, then that's a very quick way of passing the configuration from one Flexy to another. Okay, that really was quite a fast run through on the menus. As I say, we in the UK and in Sweden, we do offer a full, and in the Netherlands. The 3 offices offer a full workshop on the Flexy. So if you wanted to attend that once all of our quarantine problems are out of the way, we'd be very happy to welcome you and take you through things a little bit slower. But hopefully from that run through, you've got an idea as to some of the key features and the capabilities of the Flexy. And I'm sure it's generated lots of questions. So I look forward to seeing those in the question and answer section in a little while's time. Okay,